as I was saying in the last session, we did the theory part of it, of compensation. We talked about what actual compensation is within the system. It's not, if you go to the third point here, third bullet point, it says compensation is not the actual wages in an employee's paycheck, right? So compensation is everything that is accumulated and given to you. It does not include any deductions or anything. It only includes the pluses, the addition, the aggregation of every element that you should be paid out by the company. And then we talked about what compensation package is. It's basically a combination of your grades and plans. And there are certain other things like guidelines, grade profiles, compensation bases, which we'll also talk about. Compensation eligibility rule. In today's session, we just use existing rules to create new rule. In tomorrow's session, we'll discuss in detail what eligibility rules are actually and how to create them. So you have to be more hands-on in creating the eligibility rules also. So we'll start with the topic now. This is a matrix that I have created, which we will all refer in our sessions for compensation in particular. You have the grade on the left-hand side. You have the plans like salary and allowance plans, and then you have the package right here. So what we'll do is in the demo, we'll create one management grade, one non-management. We'll create a salary plan, a car allowance plan, and we'll create one package. As assignment, you'll have to create another package along with this. Like you definitely have to create this and then create another one. And you can use the same countries, but if you want to use different locations, you can use that also. So let's start with that. Let me quickly, the very first thing that we'll do is we'll start by creating a grade. And by now you all must know what task we'll use. You use the keywords and just prefix it with create. Create a compensation grade. We'll create everything effective. Then something called as pay range segments. Now, if you recall correctly, what is a grade? Grade and grade profiles, they give you the pay range references. Basically, a range, a minimum and a maximum. It gives you a range that this is what the compensation should be for a particular role, right? So that can be divided in multiple segments in a partitions of 3, 4, and 5. And that's Workday allowed. Like you can do up to 5 partitions also. But if I go beyond that, Workday will give me an error. It says the number of segments must be 3, 4, or 5. And 4 is the most common one that I have seen company using it because it evenly distributes the range. Then is the grade profiles. As we talked about in the last session, it allows for localization. So if your company is just located, you only have one office, not many job profiles, then you don't need grade profiles probably. But if your company is localized in different parts of the world, then definitely something you need. Okay, so we'll select that, click OK. In our case, in our scenario, we are using these two, which is Switzerland and Boston. So we'll give it a name, which will be Velvet Executive. In every configuration of compensation that we do, we'll have to enter some default values. And these, I'm sure in your notes somewhere you have written compensation defaulting. Now, compensation defaulting is a concept which defaults the value based on the configuration that we have done in the backend. So there are two different perspectives of compensation defaulting. One is based on what we add here. The other is based on the eligibility rules. So we'll talk about both of them as we progress with the configuration. But let's first see compensation happens in 3 phases. You learn compensation in 3 phases. First, you just replicate the configuration that you learned in the demo. Second, you try to connect the dots that, okay, I've done this particular thing. What's the next? Then the third is you do that configuration again without referring to any demo videos. Okay. So in the default values for it will change based on what you're creating. If you're creating a grade, you will have a different values. If you're creating a salary plan, allowance plan, these default values will change. It asks for a base pay element. Base pay is your literal base pay that you receive, but it's the compensation element which directly ties to your payroll earning codes. So we always use standard base pay. You can definitely change that as well, and it will change based on different regions. If your company is headquartered not in US, somewhere in Europe, then definitely it might be something else. Eligibility rule, we'll keep it blank because this has a good relevance in this case. So we'll come to that in a minute. Currency, ideally we keep it defaulting to the headquarters. Frequency, let's say we keep it monthly. Now, what will happen is, let's say you hire an employee who does not come under this executive grade completely, but partially. What I mean by partially is based on the eligibility rules, whatever we define. Let's say you have a new hire who is actually an executive. Okay, but based on our complete setup of the system, let's say we are creating Switzerland and Boston. Let's say you have a new executive hired in Netherlands. For Netherlands, we have not added any compensation values, like any ranges that we see here. So in that case, even though the employee is eligible for the grade, but there is no value defined for Netherlands. So in that case, their currency will default to USD and a monthly occurrence. We'll talk a little bit more on this once we complete our grade profiles. Now, if you're using grade profiles, you don't need this default. What will happen, let's say I enter the value between 1,000 to 5,000 or 10,000. And why we have 4 segments? Because we decided to have the pay range segments to be 4. If I put it as 3, you will only see 3. Now, again, this is the default one, compensation pay range, default. You click on this button, calculate segments, it automatically divides the values in equal segments and also gives you a midpoint. Though 5,500 does not seem to be a midpoint. Oh, midpoint for that particular range, because it's not from 0 to 10,000, it's from 1 to 10,000. Now, the important part comes in the grade profile section. This is where we add that localization for Switzerland and Boston. So let's start with that. We'll give it a name. Again, the same thing. Now, to make it specific to Switzerland, we have to create an eligibility rule which only captures employee in Switzerland. Right now, we don't have a grade like this. Oh, we don't have a location like this. So what we'll do is we'll actually create one eligibility rule, create compensation eligibility rule. Like, okay. And compensation eligibility rule works on the concept of A equals to B, where A is this, B is A equals to is this, and B is this. In eligibility rules, comparison type does not have any relevance. So we always keep it to the default value that it is. So we are trying to do A equals to B, which means our A should be a field which can capture location. Our relation operator will be equal to, and your comparison value, which is B, should be Switzerland. But do we even have a Switzerland location for Velvet? Let's look in that. So we look for a field location primary. This is not the right field because it does not capture the locations that we have, but it does capture the country here. So anyone hired in Switzerland will get there. But this is a very generic eligibility rule that I'm using. We'll change it later once we do the setup. Velvet, Switzerland. So we have created an eligibility rule which will only capture employees in Switzerland, which we will use here. We'll give the currency now. It's Switzerland. So Switzerland currency is different. This is true localization. I can add USD here also. Workday will not give me an error. So that's why when you're doing this setup, you have to be very careful. And this is where we enter the values for them. So let's see what we have. We have 50 to 90,000 euros. I think it should be CHG. 50 to 90,000. And then I click on this checkbox and it automatically calculates the values. Likewise, on the similar lines, we'll add another one for Boston. I just clicked on this plus sign here. So it will be Velvet Executive. For now, we'll use any existing eligibility rule, but we'll create one later for ourselves. Let's see if this will work. Now, currency will be USD. Currency monthly. And if you don't have that amount values, you can click on the plus sign here. You'll get this here. And then you enter the values, which is 60 to 100,000. Then you click on this button here and click OK. Now let's observe what we have done so far. I'm also getting that same alert, so nothing to worry about. So we created a grade called as Velvet Executive Grade, which has some default values. And we have given a default range 100 to 10,000, which is basically a failure range. If none of the eligibility rules are met, then only this range will be used. Okay. Now, I have created two grade profiles, one specific to Boston, and I have made it specific using this eligibility rule, and the same for Switzerland using this eligibility rule. Now, what will happen is if a new hire is added in the system and is an executive plus from Switzerland, they'll be eligible for this range. But what I'm missing here is the employee executive, how will the system know? Because you have not added any eligibility rule here. So we'll add that here, your executive. I created an eligibility rule a while back. It should be here. So I'll use this one. Management level is executive or director. This covers these management levels, which is executive and director. So any executive or director now hired in the company, the way the system will evaluate these eligibility is they'll first check this eligibility rule, that whether the manager, whether that person hired is an executive or a director. Once that eligibility rule is met, then it will go to your grade profiles, which will be if the employee is hired in Boston, they are eligible for this range. If the employee is hired in Switzerland, they will be eligible for this range. And if the new hire is an executive or a director, but not from Switzerland in Boston, they'll be eligible for this default range. Now visualize a scenario where whenever you are hired in a company or will get hired, your range will vary based on the eligibility rules that are set in the system. That's why in your notes, you have it written as the main driver. And that is how it works. And not just this, you can add more conditions to this, that management level is director or executive plus group or department is engineering. So once that is sought out, once that is true, then it will move to the grade profiles. And likewise, you can have unlimited number of grade profiles in this list. I worked with a company which had 5 grade profiles. I am working with a company which has 1,800 plus grade profiles. So a lot changes when your company is global in nature. They are spread out across every part of the world. You will have different packages, you will have different grades, many grades. Like you will have a different series of grades for your sales. You will have different one for engineering. You will have a different one for executives. And the configuration goes a lot complex, but if you understand this configuration of how to set up 2 grade profiles or 5 grade profiles, you can literally expand that setup to 500 or 1500. The concept remains the same. Complexity only lies in your eligibility rules, nothing else. Because all this information that you see here, the range will be given to you. You'll be told, what location this range is for. Apart from location, whatever the eligibility rule that, they should be in this particular grade, they should have this particular management level, that becomes slight complex when the setup is done at a global level. But otherwise, replicate this, practice this until you don't have to look into the demo. Likewise, we'll create another grade, which will be non-executive, basically non-executive or non-director. Okay, so I'll start by creating another grade. Because of this, in the initial configuration, when we start with creation of grade, we gave a value of 4. That's why you see from segment 1 to segment 4. If let's say in this case, I give the range as 5. Okay, you will see 5 different segments. You see here? That is what it's coming from. Okay, so let's start with creation of another grade, which will be our non-executive. Marking it as N-exec. Again, a similar practice. And there are some Workday delivered frequencies like monthly, bi-weekly, like across the world, wherever Workday has its presence, and they have some default frequencies, but you can create your own as well. Like you can see here, fetch annual or Prakash periodically, talent hourly. So you can create your own as well. Okay. And then, yeah, we'll again give some, we'll put it from 0 to 10,000. So these are failure values. Following the same practice we did for this section, then the next thing is we'll do it for this section. I'll give it the name, Velvet, and exec, Boston. Basically, element remains the same. Eligibility rule, we used the Boston one, we can use that again. Currency will be USD. Frequency, again, monthly. And then we'll add the values here. So we'll add those values. Now, since we selected 5 pay range segments, so it will be divided into 5 parts. Likewise, we'll click on the plus sign on the top left here. We'll start by adding another name, Velvet, non-exec, Switzerland, same things. Eligibility rule will be for Swiss, currency CHE, frequency will be monthly again. And we'll click on the plus sign here to get that particular row where we add our values, and the values that we need are in row number 7, 30,000 to 50,000. And then we click OK. Now, in this case, we don't have to give any eligibility rule because we have already separated any employee who is executive or director. We wanted specific ranges for executive and director management level, which we have already done in our executive grade. Now, in our non-executive, by default, anyone who is not an executive or a director will by default be eligible for this because there is no eligibility rule defined in the default section. So the system will evaluate, let's say you have a transfer, someone is moving from one location to another. Let's say someone is moving from Boston to Switzerland and they're non-executive, they're not an executive. The system will evaluate, okay, there's no eligibility rule here. The next eligibility rule actually comes at your location. So they'll be moving from Boston. So whatever range they have, they'll now be eligible for this range, which is between 30 to 50,000 CHE, which is the local currency of Switzerland. So now, as part of the assignment, you have to create these 2 grades, one after the other. And as part of an extra assignment, you also have to create a sales grade. You can pick, I'm adding XYZ and ABC. You have to pick any two locations, and these locations will be the one that you have created. You won't be able to put it in eligibility rule yet because we have not covered that part. We'll cover that after we complete the whole setup. But what the way we created these eligibility rules here, we use the existing one. Like for this one, you can use Velvet Swiss as a reference and create another one. Instead of Switzerland, just pick up another country. Okay. And then pick some random values, minimum and maximum. I'm adding 0 right now. You can add any value because this is just for practice. And put the local currency. I'm just adding C here so that you can add the currency. So you have to create another sales grade in which you have to create at least 3 different grade profiles for 3 different locations. That would be an additional assignment with the compensation grade part. Right now, just look at the demo, replicate the complete setup. If something is not making sense, make a note of it. We'll discuss it. Right now, the focus is, like I said, the compensation learning comes in 3 parts. One is just replicating, getting your hands comfortable, getting your navigation comfortable in what needs to be created and how can we create it. The next thing is we'll create the dots, how these are used. And the third part is again doing the same thing, again doing the same practice, but now with the complete understanding of what happens where and how is it connected without looking back to the demo. All right, so moving to the salary plans. The task again is pretty simple. You type in create salary plan. And let's say if you have to create an hourly plan, you just replace the salary with the keyword hourly. You have to create an allowance plan. You just replace that with allowance. So in this case, whatever type of plan that you have to create, you have to give that as a keyword. Okay. So we'll start by creating a salary plan. Right. Okay. Give it the name, which is Velvet Salary Plan. Plan eligibility. Who will be eligible for this plan? Now, I very well recall that we did some job profiles on the system. Let's look at that. The search is also restricted. So we created these job profiles in the system who are associated with your job families and job family groups. So I'm looking at a job family group for Velvet HCM. Now I want that only employees in the Velvet HCM job family group to be eligible for this salary plan. Okay, so what I'll do is I'll create an eligibility rule. Again, I'll use the concept of A equals to B. I need to identify what my A is. In this case, my A would be a field, which would be a job family group. Let's see if we have. So we have a job family and job family group field. And then my value of B is Velvet HCM. So I have to equalize it too. So I'll pick a value which any in the selection list is basically whatever we put values here. It's one of them. It's any of them. I'll put my Velvet HCM here. So I can actually put both because it's one is family and this family is being used in this family group. So I write job family group is equal to Velvet HCM. So I've created a new eligibility rule. I'll go back to my setup and I'll put it here. Just Velvet HCM. Now, anyone who is hired in any of these job profiles or associated with these job profiles will only be eligible for these plans. We don't need this. And then on the right-hand side, you can see some values like apply FTE and everything. So FTE is called as full-time equivalent. And Workday is nice enough, is kind enough to us that it evaluates that automatically. And this is evaluated based on, if you recall, we created some locations. In locations, we added a time profile, like a standard 40 hours or Velvet 40 hours, something like that. So if you are tied to one of the location, which has a time profile of 40 hours. By default, your weekly hours becomes 40. And if your actual working hours are also 40 hours, then your FTE percentage will be 100%. But let's say you are tied to a location. Let me open stuff now. So let's say you have a location, which is your Boston location, tied to a 40-hour work week. That accounts for your default weekly hours, your location weekly hours, basically. That means by default, this is not refreshed. That means by default, your work week is for 40 hours. But let's say you're only clocking in 20 hours. That means your FTE percentage will be 50%. So that is how, if we select this, Workday automatically calculates your FTE percentage. And based on that, your compensation is calculated. So if you are working 40 hours a week, you are getting $5,000 a month for this, but you reduced your FTE to 50%, you will get $2,500. So Workday does that automatically. You don't have to make any changes to it. But still, if the company says that, you're a special customer, you're a special employee, even if you're working 20 hours, we'll give you 100% of it. So you can select the second option. None of the above, we don't select it. I don't know why this option is still here. This means that payroll will manually evaluate. And again, for smaller organizations, this may be useful because there is no part-time employees. But if you have part-time employees, you definitely need this. Or if you have employees working on a different schedule other than the default schedule of that particular location, you definitely need to apply. So by default, we always enable it. Again, salary defaults. This is directly tied to your earning codes, and whatever you enter here is what you see on your payslip. You can create your own as well, like you can see Shri standard base pay. Now, the only thing I don't like is people even create it and don't change it back to the original state. So I'll use an existing one. Someone might have renamed the original one. Workday should put a filter, you cannot change the default names, but most of the places we can, and people leverage that, but I think the bad practices, they don't turn it back. Anyway, so put an element here. The next thing is process eligibility. Now, it's not applicable to our scenario for our learning because this is an advanced compensation topic. It says exclude from merit. There are merit cycles, performance evaluations, succession planning, calibrations. All those are covered in your advanced compensation. So if you don't want your salary plan information to be included in your merit cycles, you can exclude them. And the reason for that is pay planning statements. Pay planning statement does not tell you your salary plans, which is another, a complex concept in itself, mostly known by the payroll team and the core, like hardcore compensation guys. So nothing for our relevance. And that's all. That's how easy setting up a salary plan is. You enter the name, you enter an eligibility rule, you apply FTE percentage, you enter an element. That's all you have to do. Assignment related to this, again, replicate this. Maybe try to create the eligibility. You can reference this eligibility rule, but try to create your own by using you all must have created your job families and job families group. You can use this and then just change the value here. But please do not change the one that I have created. I repeat, do not change the one that I have created. You're not supposed to change any configuration that has my unique alias in it. Like in this case, it's Velvet. You can copy that. You can create your own, use that as reference. You have to do that, but don't change any of my configuration. Okay. The next thing we'll do is we'll create allowance plan. Okay. Again, the task is allowance plan, something similar. Now, by the time you do your first initial run of creating compensation grades and grade profiles and salary plan, the other things start to, come in a rhythm. It becomes easier for you to then create these, right? So you can create based on an amount, percentage, or unit. There are three types here, and each of them is used in different cases. In our case, this is more relevant. Why? Go to my matrix. We have these as a value of 50 and 70. It's not like, we are giving it based on some percentage. Percentage and unit based are mostly used for sales and commission employees, where based on how they have performed, they'll get certain percentage of it. Or like, your bonus plans, like how company has done, based on that you will get some percentage of that. And unit, you will have to first define the unit, what that is, and then you can use, which is very rarely used. Amount based is a straightforward plan. You just enter the amount and click OK. So we'll give it a name. Velvet car allowance. And in the plan eligibility, again, I only want the employees who are, let's say, management and of director level should be eligible for these allowances. So I'll again use that same rule, which is management level is executive or director. So only employees who are management level director, they'll be eligible for this. Now, I'm not restricting them based on any supervisory organization or any job profile. I'm just simply stating if that particular employee is a director or a manager or an executive, they'll be eligible for the car allowance. And again, by default, we'll select the FTE. In the defaults, we'll give car allowance, because this is what you will see on the pay slips. You can enter a default amount also. Let's say I add $100. The frequency will be, we want this on a quarterly basis. I think that's what we have here, on a quarterly basis. This would change to CHE. Now, there are two ways to it. Either I create two different car allowance plans, or I use the plan profile option, which is right here. How will this work? This is on a similar concept of grade profiles, but you don't have to add a lot of things. Is we'll put them specific based on the location. So we'll give the currency, something similar to what we did in the grade profiles, and we'll enter the amounts, 50 and 70. Now, if any employee who is at the management level, executive or director, is hired in either Switzerland or Boston, they'll get these values for car allowance. But let's say you have a new director hired in Australia, for which we don't have any plan profile added, so they'll default to this value. That's another perspective of allowance defaults, not just allowance default. In general, what defaulting is, compensation defaulting. And whether it's a recruiter, whether it's a hiring manager, or someone in the HR ops team, they are doing this transaction and they see that an Australian employee getting 100 USD, they have to flag it, rescind that transaction, and then add another profile here. So that case will come to you as a Workday consultant to add another grade profile or a plan profile into this existing grade or an existing plan. Okay. And if I enable this checkbox, you see no override. If I enable this, that means these values become fixed. 50 and 70, this will become fixed for those locations. And you have a scenario where you hired someone in Switzerland as a director at a director level, and you want to give them more than 50 euros or 50 Switzerland. Yeah, 50 Swiss, I think they call it Swiss euros or something. And if you want to give more than that, then you will have to disable this. But this will be applicable to all the plans. every eligibility rule in the car allowance plan. So that's a business decision whether they want to give the ability to override it or not. And that's all. All the configuration is very simple as long as you understand how these eligibility rules are deriving it. There's still one piece left, which is the most easiest one, is to just put all of them together, which is create compensation package, which is the easiest thing to do because all you have to do is put everything that you have created, Velvet comp package, put your grades here, which is your Velvet executive and non-executive. We created a Velvet. Why is it not coming up? And then you add your plans here, which is your salary, and then your car allowance. That's it. You just create. So this covers your complete setup of compensation that you have here. So I'll request you to please take a screenshot of this and start working on your assignment.